Hello there, I'm Greg. Welcome back to my channel, Midnite Oil Software, and another lunchtime live stream. Even though it's on a weekend, I guess it is still lunchtime. I think what I'm going to do today is move on to implementing object pooling. As you recall, what I'm doing is I'm prepping my 3D space shooter tutorial game to eventually add multiplayer support, and I've implemented being able to take damage and be destroyed. I've got a player manager that will now dynamically spawn the player ship. So that's all done. And the next thing on the list was object pooling. And so if we scroll down, I want to implement object pooling for frequently spawned and destroyed objects. Because things like projectiles and stuff that get rapidly spawned and despawned, you're creating garbage on the heap, which can cause performance issues when the garbage collector goes to reclaim that memory, which can cause some hiccups and stutters. So I really wanted to address that before we started adding multiplayer support. So I'm going to start with blaster projectiles. And actually, before I actually implement it for any particular component, I want to, excuse me, I want to add a framework. I'm going to be using Unity's built-in object pooling, but I want to create my own object pool manager. And I'm going to use the strategy pattern, a combination of the strategy pattern and the factory pattern. And why the strategy pattern? Well, every poolable object can have its own initialization, reset, and cleanup logic, and so forth. And the strategy pattern basically allows me to encapsulate those behaviors and make this highly extensible. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into Unity, and under scripts, I want to create a utilities folder. That doesn't look right. Yeah, it does. Okay, utilities. And in here, I'm going to create a script, a mono behavior script. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. What did I do? Create scripting mono behavior script. Okay, and I want to call this IPoolStrategy. So this is going to be an interface. So I guess I didn't need to make that a mono behavior. But this is also going to be a generic. And we're going to say it will be a component. Okay, let me get rid of these. And this will not be a class, it will be an interface. Interface name expected, of course. Where? Okay. If you don't do something very often, you can forget little odd details. I'm going to have an on create. I want to have a on get t. Yeah, item is fine. On release and on destroy. I want to have some private getters here. Well, not private, but I want to have a game manager or game object prefab. And we want to give it a default capacity or initial capacity. and a maximum capacity. Okay. I want to create a pool manager. And now that I think about it, utilities is kind of vague. So I'm going to rename this to be pooling. And I want to create another script in here. And this is going to be our pool manager. Create. Scripting. Mono behavior script. Pool manager. Go ahead and open that up. So this is going to be basically be our factory. So I mentioned we're going to use a combination of the strategy pattern and the factory pattern. So this is going to be our factory that creates and manages all of our object pools. And so again, why a factory pattern? So our pool manager is going to centralize our pool creation and provide a clean API for getting and releasing objects. So that way clients don't need to manage their own object pool instances. So often in the past, what I've done is I would have like my, projectile manager, and it would have its own object pool, and it would handle everything with the pool. And that's fine. That's definitely a valid approach. But I wanted to try something different and use a factory pattern where I have a centralized factory for managing all of the object pools. And we'll see how that works out. So this is going to be a singleton mono behavior of type pool manager. And so this is a pattern that I have used throughout this project ever since I pulled in my core package. So there are several things. If we go and look at our project and we go into scripts, managers, so like our enemy ship manager. Actually, that's not a good example, is it? Let's see. Are there any good examples in here? Where am I using the singleton mono behavior in this project? So I just recently pulled this asset in here. So maybe I haven't been making, I know the event bus is using it. So if you go into my core packages, if we look at event bus, you can see it is a singleton mono behavior of type event bus. And this basically just encapsulates all of our singleton lifecycle stuff, where we handle, if we go and actually look at the base class, where we handle our singleton instance and assigning it when you instantiate it and deleting any duplicates that get created because you only ever want to have one of these. So that's basically what the singleton mono behavior gives us. It just encapsulates all that singleton management. Let me close this. Let me close this. And let me go back into our pool manager. So I want to have a dictionary. It's going to be read-only dictionary of type, and then object. And I'm going to call this pools, and we're just going to do new. And now I need to include system collections generic to bring in that dictionary. So that's going to be our dictionary of pools. So when we want to create a pool of a given type, it's going to be added to this dictionary. And then we can just look it up by that type. And then I want to have a root I need to include Unity Engine. So now we have transform. This is what we're going to instantiate the things that we pool under, so they're all grouped together in the hierarchy. We want to override awake. We're going to call the base class. We're going to say pool root. We're going to create a new game object, and we're going to give it a name, pooled objects, and we're going to grab the transform off of it, and we're going to set its parent to be us, our transform. Okay. Now, we want to have a method to get or create pool. This would be a public object pool of type T. And we want to say get or create pool of type T. We're going to take a pool strategy type T, strategy. And let's make sure, wow, I don't know how much of this is correct. So it's auto-completing a bunch of stuff for me. We definitely want to look that over. But we're saying where T, it's saying where it's a mono behavior. I'm actually going to say where it's a component. So object pool, we're going to use Unity Engine pool for that. Let's look at what it's creating in here. So type is definitely going to be type of T. I'm just going to throw away all this code. I have prototyped this, and I'm going to use what I had prototyped instead of what it is suggesting. I'll close that. Okay, so I want to say if pools.try_get_value type out var existing pool, then I just want to return object pool T existing pool. So if we've already got one in our dictionary, we're just going to grab it and return it. Otherwise, we're going to create a new pool. I'm going to copy and paste this from my little prototype code. So let's look at this code. We're going to instantiate a new object pool. We're going to use the strategies on create, the strategies on get. We're going to use the strategies on release, on destroy. We want it to check the collection. We want to set its default capacity, which I think we called initial capacity, and max capacity. All right. So that looks pretty cool. Now we want to have a get method. So public T get IPoolStrategy of type T strategy. Of course, it would help if I put that in parentheses. All right, so perfect. We're going to get the pool, which is either going to get or create one, and then we are going to return it. Awesome. And we want to have a release. I'm going to say item. Pool strategy T strategy where T component. Perfect. And let's see, I want to have a public transform get pool root. Let me just move that to the top here. I don't know why it does that. All right. And lastly, in on destroy, we want to call the base. And then we want to clear our collection of pools. I think that's good for our pool manager. So now I also want to have a poolable interface. This is going to be that we can put on components that can be pooled. So public interface, IPoolable, and on spawn from pool and on return to pool. And then I'm going to right click and say move to its own class. And add it to source control. All right. It doesn't like that spelling, but you know what? I like it. So I'm going to add it to dictionary so it doesn't warn me about that anymore. Okay. So let's start with the projectile class. The very first thing I want to do is I want to add that interface. IPoolable. Oops. IPoolable. And then I want to implement missing members. And put them down at the bottom. And I think I also want to add up here IPoolStrategy of type projectile pool strategy. Just looking through, see what I did. So I want to have a public method. So we have init, but I want to have a public method set pool strategy. And that's all that's going to do. Now in the on collision enter, we want to replace this destroy with return to pool. And I'm going to have to create that method. So it's suggesting a bunch of code. I'm just going to paste this in. So if pool strategy is not null and we have a pool manager, then we want to tell the pool manager to release this using that pool strategy. Otherwise, we are just going to destroy the game object. All right, so now I'm going to wrap this in a region. IPoolable implementation. I'm going to put an end region. So now if I collapse this, you can see that's our iPoolable implementation. Okay. And this is where if I needed to do any extra initialization or cleanup, I would do it here. And the only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set has collided to false. You know, we may want to come and revisit this. We might want to do something like set our velocity and angular velocity and everything, just so that you don't spawn a reused projectile already moving. The next thing we want to do is actually create our strategy. So I'm going to go back into the PoolManager here, and I'm going to create a new class. And public class projectile pool strategy. And boy, does it think it knows more than it does. So let me just go ahead and delete all this. And I'm going to move this into its own file and add that to source control. And I know I'm going to want Unity Engine. I want using Unity Engine. And I'm going to want to use pooling. Oh, you know what? I was thinking of putting all this stuff in a namespace, and I didn't, so I'm just going to omit that. All right, so I want to have a game object. Well, let me go ahead and implement this. And it'll stub out all of those. Let me move all these guys up to the top. And so actually what I'm going to do is create some private variables here, and then just some extension body methods or properties, prefab. I think I want this to be all right. And then I think all that looks correct. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to want a public method. I'm going to replace all that code that I let it automatically implement. I'm just going to paste all this in here. And let's go look at this. This should be initial capacity. All right. Did not rename that. All right. And on create. So this is our, when we create this projectile pool strategy. We're giving it the prefab, we're giving it our pool route, we're giving it the initial capacity, and then its max size. And then we initialize our member variables with those parameter values. Okay, so in onCreate, we're going to do an object.instantiate our prefab at our root, and we're going to get the projectile component off of it. We are setting our pool strategy to this. We are setting this initially to be inactive, the instance that we just instantiated, and we're returning that instance. So in onGet, we are going to, I'm going to rename this to projectile. We're going to set the game active to true. We are going to, if it is a poolable object, if it has that interface, we're going to call the onSpawned from pool method on it. And then same thing here with onRelease. We're going to get the IPoolable interface, and then we're going to return it to the pool. We're going to deactivate it, and we're going to parent it to the pool root. All right. And then on destroy, I want to use the Unity Life Cycle Management. I'm going to rename this to Projectile. And again, use Unity's Life Cycle Management. So if it's not null and the game object's not null, we're going to destroy it. So that should implement the object pooling for projectiles. So now let's modify our blaster to use that pooling system. Okay. This is Blaster UI, and that is not what I wanted. That's the one I wanted. Okay, so all of this looks good, good, good. So we want to add our pool strategies. So I think I'm going to add them right after our private variables. IPoolStrategy projectile. Projectile strategy. And then IPoolStrategy projectile weak projectile strategy. All right. In awake, we are going to want to initialize our pool strategies. And let's go ahead and create that method. So if we don't have a pool manager, dot instance, then we don't want to just return. We want to debug.log warning pool manager not found. Blaster will use instantiate fallback. And then I want to return. Okay, otherwise, we want to get our pool root. Okay, And then we want to instantiate our projectile strategy. We're going to look at this over here. So we're going to give it our prefab. We're going to give it our pool root. And right now it's going to use the default values for initial capacity and max size, which is fine. We could override them here. In fact, let's do this. Serialized field, int, initial pool size, max pool size. And let's just go ahead and supply those. That way, we can configure it in the inspector if we decide we want to have a bigger or smaller pool. All right. All right, so let's go down to fire projectile. And right here, where we are instantiating, yeah. So right here, let me just delete this. And I want to say projectile equals get projectile from pool full charge. And we're going to create that method. And let's see here. If for some reason we didn't get a projectile, I want to debug log warning failed to get projectile from pool using instantiate fallback. And we'll do that. Otherwise, we want to set the projectile's position and rotation. And we actually just want to use our transform rotation. Okay, so now we need to implement get object from pool, get projectile from pool. So if not PoolManager dot instance return null. Otherwise, we're going to use either the projectile strategy or the weak projectile strategy. And I think that is it. Now, unless I missed something, this should work now for my blasters. I should be pooling projectiles from and I don't think there's anything I need to configure in the inspector. Well, I do need to add the PoolManager. So let me go back into Unity, and I'm going to create empty. I'm going to call this PoolManager. I'm going to move it up there. I'm going to add component PoolManager. I don't need that to be there for now. All right, let's just give it a try. Okay, and you can see that I've got a PoolManager here, and under pooled objects, there are some enemy projectiles. Where did they come from? Because I didn't think there were any. Oh, there are enemy ships. So they're already shooting at me. Okay, let me just try and shoot. Oh, I'm getting hit. So I think that's a problem. So am I being hit by my own projectiles? I'm seeing some errors in the console. Trying to release an object that's already been released from the pool. That's being called from Projectile. On collision, enter. You know what? This should be return to pool. That wouldn't be the problem, though. So I think I'm trying to return it more than once. That's the problem. Has collided. No, that shouldn't happen. Maybe I should move this there. One other thing, though. I definitely want to disable it, because I was destroying it. Now I'm just returning it to the pool. All right, let's see if that changes anything. I'm going to turn off the enemy ship manager so I don't have to deal with enemies. I just want to fly around and see if I can shoot asteroids. want that to be expanded. I'm going to go into my PoolManager. Just want to look at the log here. Make sure it's doing what I think it's doing. Oh, I know why. I also don't know what that error is, though. Timer manager wasn't cleaned up. All right, let me go into my PoolManager and enable debug log. Shoot a bunch of projectiles. All right, getting instance of projectile from pool. Where am I releasing? I did not see that message in the log, and that's concerning. Hey there, Bade Palliaj. I hope I'm saying that right. Thanks for tuning in. I am not hitting that breakpoint. Or I did hit it. That seems a little disheartening that I only hit it just now after I've fired. So maybe I never hit anything before. Oh, that's something interesting. What do I do when this thing runs out of fuel? It should get destroyed. It should return to the pool when I run out of fuel too. Yeah. Let me take a look at that. Yep. Let me see if I had prototyped that. Yeah, I got to do the same thing. Although I'm duplicating code, I just noticed. So in the on collision enter, well, no, return to pool does this. But this code in my prototype, I was duplicating this code when I do this. I think all I want to do here is call return to pool. So now if I just fire a bunch of projectiles off into space, they should get returned to the pool. Yep. Very, very nice. And there are a bunch of deactive projectiles. So now, if I start firing projectiles, we should just see those being reused and activated. Very, very nice. And it will never grow unless I have more projectiles than that in the scene. So I'm very, very happy with that. I have got object pooling working for projectiles, and I'm using a strategy and factory pattern combination that can be easily extended for other poolable types. So I'm going to go ahead and commit this to source control. And then I think I'm going to ask Bezi to, based on this pattern, add it to other poolable types. I guess I'll probably do it one at a time. Let me go look at my browser. Effects. Well, there's also missiles. Here we go. Objects to pool. Missiles. Let's do it missiles next. And we're going to see how well Bezi does following my existing pattern. So if you haven't watched before, Bezi is a AI coding assistant that integrates directly with Unity, and it is aware of my Unity project. And if I go back into Unity, and if I just select my PoolManager here in the hierarchy, and I go back to Bezi, you can see it could tell that I selected PoolManager. I'm going to add that to its context. I'm going to get rid of that, and that, and that, and that, and that, and that. I want to limit its context, but I do want it to look at multiplayer prep. So it has that context, and it has my PoolManager context. And while I'm in here, I'm just going to add in IPoolStrategy. I'm going to add my PoolManager and Projectile. And that. And Blaster. Basically, all the things that had to get modified. Oh, I want that, actually, not that. So I wanted to look at what we've already done for object pooling, and I wanted to basically follow that pattern and implement object pooling for missiles. All right. Following the established pattern for pooling blaster projectiles, implement object pooling for missiles. Continue to follow the factory, strategy, factory pattern combination using the PoolManager singleton. Okay. And another thing I've got is I've got my project rules where I give it my coding guidelines and how I want it to talk to me. So you could call me Padawan from Star Wars. Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead and tell it to go. Are you going? There we go. Thinking. You know what? I'm going to stop it. And I'm going to put it in agent mode. And click submit to basically reissue this prompt. But in agent mode, it will actually apply the changes. If you just put it in ask mode, it'll tell you what to do, but it won't actually do it. So it's examining the current missile implementation. Now it's going to implement the missile pooling system following the established pattern. It's creating missile pool strategy. That's good. And this is what it's given me. That all looks good. Now it's going to add the IPoolable interface to my missile so it can be pooled. There it goes. So it added IPoolable. It's added has collided and IPoolStrategy. Set pool strategy. So it's obviously going to have to do more changes here. The next thing we're going to pull is the explosions. Okay, there we go. We replaced destroy object with return to pool. Now it's updating the missile launcher to use pooling. It's going to check its work. All right, go ahead and keep those changes. Switch over to Unity. And hit play. I want to okay. Does not look like, oh, there it goes. So I got the missiles from the pool, and then I returned them back to the pool. So it seems to be working for missiles. Of course, I didn't hit anything. I guess I should try that. I'll shoot an asteroid with it. Yep, looks like it worked. The other one's still flying, so it should go back into the pool in a second whenever it runs out of fuel. There it goes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to go and add it to source control. Okay, so I think the last thing I'm going to do today is following that same pattern, add object pooling for explosions and other effects. So I'm going to get rid of, well, I guess I'll just leave that there. Let me, I think these individual guys spawn their own effects. So like this asteroid has this explosion prefab, which means this guy is probably spawning that explosion. So it'd be interesting to see how Bezi approaches this. It's going to have to search through the project to figure out where effects are spawned and destroyed. It's not as straightforward as picking a blaster or a missile launcher. That looks like a good plan. So one thing I don't like about this is this detonator class came from an asset that's been deprecated. But if this was an asset that was still still available in the asset store, it would get overwritten whenever I pulled down an update. And so I wouldn't be wanting to modify that directly. But I think because this is a deprecated asset, I'm not going to worry about that, because the developer abandoned it and it's not going to be getting any updates. Okay, now it's updating shield explosion. I like the way it removed those private keywords. So that means it's paying attention to my project rules. So it's implementing the IPooling or IPoolable. Modifying missile, which I guess spawns an explosion when it impacts something. Ooh, effect manager play. Oh, there's an effect manager now. Update damage handler to use pooled explosions. So it's already done asteroid. Now it's using the damage handler. Yeah, go ahead and continue. So I think this tool, Bezi, is an amazing tool. I have the Pro subscription. That's $20 a month. And in my opinion, it's absolutely worth it. The time that it saves me, I mean, if you've been following my series, any of my tutorials, you know I'm fully capable of writing code and designing games without this tool. But the time saving and just the documentation it produces is just amazing. It's great for tutorials. I've been able to go back through all my existing tutorials that I have source code for on Git and had it generate comprehensive architecture diagrams and documentation. That's just a README file now in GitHub. So anybody coming and looking at my tutorial now has a very visual document to follow. They're not just watching the videos now. There's just comprehensive documentation that if I was to try and write all that by hand, it would take me weeks. Effect PoolManager. So there's a separate PoolManager. I'm not sure I like that. I'm going to have to study this. So it's distinguishing between the different types of effects. And I guess it figured it needed a separate pool manager since it's managing a lot of different types of effects. It's still using our PoolStrategy. It's still using our PoolManager instance. I guess we'll find out in testing how well it works. And there's an effect manager. Oh, look at that. It's giving me an implementation guide document. This would be a good example for you to see. Scan. To see the kind of documentation that it produces. It actually created a page, object pooling implementation. So it created iEffect, effect pool strategy, effect manager, effect pool manager, and missile pool strategy. It modified IPoolable, iEffect, and IPoolable, shield explosion, missile launcher, projectile, asteroid, and damage handler. Consistent pooling, graceful fallbacks, memory efficient, collision safe, configurable, clean physics, so it resets velocities, and effect life cycle, proper particle system management, that's important. So it created this document with an architecture overview, usage samples, setup instructions, benefits, and notes. So let's take a look at this document. So here's our core interfaces, the pool managers, the strategies, pooled components, usage. So we have an effect manager, play effect, the prefab, position and rotation, specific effect type, where you give it the generic type, weapon pooling example, custom effect pools. So I need to add an effect pool manager to the scene and add that component, and then assign the prefabs and configure the pool sizes. And I need to ensure that the effect prefabs, that they all have the updated script. So I need to double check them. That should already be taken care of. All right, so let me go ahead and do this step here. So I'm going to say create empty. Effect pool manager. And I want to add effect pool manager. I want to move this up here under pool manager. So detonator prefab. Shield explosion. I'm just going to leave that with defaults. And this has already been updated, so that looks good. All right, let's just give it a test. Well, I see an explosion. Where did it spawn the explosions? Ah, so that's interesting. It did not create them underneath the pooled objects transform. So, but I should see it reuse those. So I'm going to leave that there. And I'm going to blow something else up. Yeah, and you can see it re-enabled existing objects. And they should get cleared here. Yep, there they go. They got returned to the pool. So the only thing I wanted to do is put them under that pooled objects parent. But other than that, this looks good. So I think I'm going to go ahead and save that. Go into my source control. Generate a check-in comment. And commit that. And push it. And I think that's good for today. So I think I'm going to tweak that just slightly in my next live stream. And then we're going to come back and revisit. So I guess there's got to double check that shield hit effects and impact effects and all that stuff are being pooled. We're going to want to start pooling asteroids and audio sources. And then optionally, the ships too should probably be spawned. Definitely the enemy ships should. So once that's all done, I'll update this document to reflect those changes. We can start looking at whether or not we want to use ECS. One of the benefits of using ECS, and I talked a little bit about this before, is there is the whole floating point precision error you get when you fly too far away from origin. So if you're, if you start an object at 0, 0, 0 and then you fly too far away, you get this floating point precision error and things start to jitter. And if we're playing a multiplayer game with an open world, if you switch to ECS, you get double floating point math, which is just better for that. So I might look into that as a possibility. The other option to handle that is to break the whole universe up into sectors. And so instead of just having XYZ, you'd have sector XYZ. And so it's your XYZ within that sector, and a sector could be defined as a certain size. And that just gets a lot more complicated in terms of calculating directions to and from different things and rendering things, especially if you're close to each other in the sense that you're in this side of this sector and then the other player's on that side of the other sector. So you're pretty close together, but you're in totally completely different sectors. How do you handle that? It's an interesting problem and be fun to tackle for sure. Yeah, so anyway, we're getting really close. We're probably 75% complete in our prep before we can actually start adding multiplayer support. So for those of you that tuned in and watched this stream, thanks for watching. If you can, click that like button and subscribe if you like this content, and click the notification bell if you want to be notified the next time I post a video or go live. But once again, thanks for watching and good luck on your game development journey.